Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute is driving bold policy solutions for a resilient Canadian agri-food system and building a stronger future for Canadian agriculture. Visit capi-icpa.com to discover how.
The Agronomists is made possible through MMP, the Edible Bean School, and the Farm Learning Hub. In the face of increasing risk from extreme weather, rising costs, and market instability, agronomist support is even more vital for sustainable production. The free Farm Learning Hub assists agronomists in identifying and implementing high-resilience practices that can help clients improve soil health and boost profitability. Check out the Farm Learning Hub today for free resources, including online courses and webinars. Certified crop advisors can also get CEU credits. Visit farmlearninghub.ca. Hello, all. Welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lindsay Smith. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here right off the hop. Some great new intro music, and great to see where everybody is joining us from today and what's happening in your neighborhood. A shout out to Kevin. 4 years ago this past weekend was the giant flood in the Fraser Valley there in BC. Pretty amazing how time flies. So there you go. Wild. I can't believe it's been that long already. Okay. I'm sure for some of you it feels like yesterday. Okay. And Pete didn't tell me I was late because I wasn't. I was right on time. And that's mostly because I'm super excited about tonight's topic. We are going to talk about varying seeding rates. But before we bring in our guests, a reminder, if you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. Let us know you took in the program. We'll get you all signed up and squared away with those credits. And while you're there, sign up for the e-newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. Now, let's bring them in. This is super exciting. 2 guests that have never been on the show. So gold star to both of you for saying yes. Jonathan Zettler, Laird, Lampertz. So we've got Ontario and Manitoba represented here. And I'm pretty sure I've got the worst weather of the two of you, which makes me a little bit sad. Laird, I'll start with you. Where are you based? What is your role with Patura Seeds? And what's keeping you busy?
Yeah, you bet. Well, thanks for having me on. It's exciting to collaborate and have this discussion. So I am Laird Lampertz. I am the Director of Sales and I'll call it Senior Agronomist because I've been around here the longest at Patura Seeds in Domain, Manitoba, really just south of Winnipeg. So kind of in the heart of the Red River Valley. But I had the opportunity to grow up in Southwest Manitoba and hang out with the Rough Riders who are celebrating right now growing up as well. So got a little bit more experience as we move further west.
Okay. And Jonathan, I'll be honest, Jonathan, you're probably the guest I have asked the most times to be on the show that has said no the most times. But you're finally here. We finally found a Monday that works. So thank you for saying yes. Tell us about Field Blocker Agronomy. What do you do? What's keeping you busy?
So it's not that we weren't willing to be on the show, Lindsay. It just never seemed to connect to show up. And this is one of the few years in the last couple of years we didn't have kids hockey, I would say, on Monday night. So, so I started Field Blocker Agronomy in 2018 after I left ag retail and brought Swap Maps to Ontario. Was the first Swap Map service provider, provide private agronomy services to people in Midwestern Ontario. So far as location in Ontario, I'm about an hour north of Guelph or 2 hours from Wheat Pete, depending on your point of reference. So
there you go. Should we all mark our distance in Ontario from Wheat Pete? I think that's a great idea.
I think everyone should. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Laird, you're super far, many hours.
The true north of agronomy. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Where's Wheat Pete? Okay. There we go. Okay, so for this discussion, it's always a fun one. It really does sort of pull in so many elements of what makes agronomy great, which is, soil, soil variability, mapping, yield potential, profit, and of course, differences between crops. So I feel like we'll have a lot of our key phrase tonight, which is it depends. But we are tackling this question of should we vary seed rates? If so, by how much and where and then how? So we have an hour. Take it away. Just kidding. But that's super simple thing to decide. Jonathan, I'll start with you. And I think, mapping is a key part of this. Where should we start? So if I'm either, a farmer or I've got, farmer clients that are coming to me and saying, this is something I want to do. Where do you sort of start? How do you broach that topic of varying seeding rates?
We have 3 or 4 different types of seeding equipment on the farm versus just having an air drill, depending on the market that you're in Western Canada. So that not everyone necessarily has that capability, but the piece I would say now, not to go that direction, you should probably have a standardized way of talking about how you're going to adjust seeding rates. So having a common way of breaking those out, whether some programs do it by soil productivity, some do it by soil type. Whatever you do, you need to have a common language, especially as you scale across multiple fields, because it gets difficult to keep track of, well, this zone 1 performs this way and that zone 1 performs a different way. And it can lead to a lot of confusion.
At the end of the way, they're going to go about it a little bit differently. And for a lot of the discussion today, I'll probably dive into what we've done here at Patura Seeds Farm, our own, 4,000 acre seed farm. But at the end of the day, are you trying to maximize profitability? Are you trying to reduce this in your soil? Are you trying to do that? It depends, much to your original answer.
Mm-hmm. Now, great comments in the side chat about how our titles change based on our age. Jason Vogt would like to say that he's the fossil agronomist. So there you go. He's the oldest. Okay, so that Laird, you hit on one of the points, and Jonathan, for you as well, is we do have to sort of figure out several different things, right? What is our equipment actually capable of doing? What crop or station? Jonathan, here in Ontario, we've got 2 main crops. Sorry, Pete. Corn and soybeans, and then yes, wheat actually does occur. There are some edible beans, but are there certain crops that it is like a slam dunk? You can pretty much make it work. And what crop or crops are those, and which ones are maybe more difficult?
So what crop is the most responsive to VR seeding rates? And from a consistency standpoint, I would say soybeans tend to have been the most consistent in some respects. Okay. I kind of see response in all 3 or 4 crops. Edible beans has been quite responsive as well. So winter wheat can be a little bit more finicky, I would say, than the other ones. But corn and soybeans, once you get it dialed in, it can be quite responsive, I would say, as far as seeding rates go. Corn, I would say, is a little bit more finicky because you need to know the genetics quite well that you're going to be playing around with, and even slight differences in population can make a big difference on the outcome, is kind of what I've learned over the last, I would say, 6-7 years. So on the soybean front, if you're planting the same, we'll call it phenotype or structure, so slender versus branched, they tend to respond the same regardless of where they're maybe being sourced from, with the exceptions to white mold or lodging issues. So right. That's kind of what I've seen. I would say is corn, you really need to know the hybrid that you're working with and vary by hybrid, not just by crop type. And if you're going to vary by crop type, you're probably going to be sorely disappointed with the responsiveness that you get from your seeding scripts. Soybeans has been quite good. Any of the growers I've done VR seeding for edible beans, typically they want to get all of the acres that are going to see edible beans mapped quite.
That you have to sift through. Are there some clear winners and some major challenges?
Yeah, great question. And I think as you look across the prairies, it's safe to say there's 4 or 5 or 6 main crops. But, um, you know, as we kind of zone into the Red River Valley here, a lot of the crops that are smaller plant populations, those typically I see the biggest range in response, good or bad, just because that lower plant population, when you range out a little bit more, it's a higher percentage of yield contribution to that area or to that zone. So I would probably start there by saying it's your light plant populations that have a greatest effect. But at the same time, some of your crops that can handle high and low plant populations definitely benefit as well, because when we're doing variable rate seeding, we can't predict what Mother Nature is going to throw us afterwards. And
Right.
it'd be a lot easier to pick that variable rate seeding rate by zone or by area if we knew what the weather was. It was going to be hot and dry early or hot and dry late. And
Right.
so that the plants like soybeans, like Jonathan alluded to, those varieties that, or those plants that can flex from 80,000 plants an acre to 180,000 plants. Slide 5 that we could
Yep,
maybe
that's
even
the
dig into. Slide 5 that we could
Yep,
maybe
that's
even
the
dig into.
sure. Let's
I
get
we'll
to it.
we'll jump right into it, and there's a lot of numbers there, but I think
Yeah.
what's more important is to maybe highlight this is in wheat,
Okay.
and this is under the actual plant stand column. You can see red numbers, and
Okay.
really the point I'm trying to highlight here, and cool and gradually warming conditions versus cold and dry or hot and dry, we had huge
Mhm.
rates in mortality differences. And so finding those crops that can adjust later in the season to either what you're trying to achieve or not trying.
Doing plant stand counts can provide some indication on seed mortality and where you need to adjust rates. Sometimes you might have what Laird alluded to earlier about soybeans and being able to flex seed mortality. Maybe you're not adjusting as much for plant stand as you are for seed mortality based on management zone. And that's kind of
Right.
where I would maybe add a couple pointers that there's multiple reasons to maybe adjust your seeding rates. At the end of the day, it comes down to, is that rate optimal for the phenotype of the plant that you're planting for that part of the field? And
Right.
if you have some variability in your field, there's probably parts of it that aren't. Your yield map can be a starting point to show that there's probably a mismatch in seeding rates, especially if you have some wide swings in it. But that's kind of final outcome. You don't know what the yield components are that made that up necessarily, but the number of plants is just one part of that. And the other piece, as Laird's showing there in terms of actual plant stand count on some of those target seeding rates, like that can certainly play into it. So like his treatment there that says high, and he put the highest seeding rate but had the least amount of plants. I'm assuming the air drill or whatever he planted with probably worked. It's just
Right. Yeah. I mean,
whatever's killing the plants off. You need to push the rates higher, right? So
yeah.
Well, and I think what you're alluding to and kind of what's on the screen is, one year you might have 99% survivability, and
Mhm.
the next year or this past year, we ended up with anywhere from 50 to 70% survivability.
Right.
And so as you dig into, what the vigor is of the seed and all those things combined with the weather, that's what gives you that difference.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Now, okay, so Jonathan, I mean, white mold occurs in Manitoba, Laird. I'm not saying it doesn't, but white mold can be a huge, huge yield cap for soybeans in parts of Ontario. Um, and Mark shares that they use variable rate on their soybeans essentially by white mold history. So that is basically one of the key things that they're using to decide where they're going to lower rates or whatever.
So if you wanted to pull up, I believe it's slide lodging, because it's outgrowing itself because it put out too many branches and too many, not necessarily the optimal number of spots to set seed. I would say you do that first, and then you protect yield by doing canopy management second. But the reason it's having canopy management problems is because you have excessive seeding rates relative to the plant's ability to set those. So if I was talking lower landscape positions, if I'm going to talk topography, so like SWAT zone 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of thing, or lower lying areas that tend to remain moist. From my experience, the soybeans tend to grow quite a bit taller in those areas. You can usually reduce seeding rates up to a certain point in those spots, depending on soil type and drainage, and do some canopy management around that. Kind of some of the same philosophy can also apply to edible beans. The caveat to that, to some extent, though, is depending on some of those wetter areas of the field, you do also have higher risk of seed mortality because of root rots. So some parts of those areas, it may have to still reduce maybe from where you had been, but keep the rate up a bit because of root rots or other issues that can show up. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, so Dr. Dave Hooker's got a great question about choosing a seeding rate and trusting a prescription with, the unpredictability of weather, which I think is an excellent argument to have. And we're going to do that. But first, Producer Jay, if you would, let's go to our second read of the night. And after that, we'll ask this question because Laird's got some great slides, I think, that can really sort of speak to how we decide these things and sort of how we trust them. So, Producer Jay, if you would. Thank you to our show sponsors, the Edible Bean School, the Farm Learning Hub, and MMP. With deep roots in agriculture, MMP helps farm businesses make confident financial decisions. From planning to growth, their advisors are here to support your success. Learn more at mmp.ca. I may have also needed tea. Okay, so Dr. Dave's question is, can any prescription algorithm correctly predict optimum seeding rates ahead of a weather anomaly, as in extreme drought or extreme rainfall? If not, why should farmers trust static prescriptions? Now, Dr. Dave, I would also love if you could tell us when there will be an extreme drought or extreme rainfall, but I don't think you can. But the way I read this, Laird, and you can interpret it how you want, but the way I sort of read this is, what goes into creating these prescription maps, and therefore, can we trust them, or what level of certainty are we putting behind them into deciding, like, yes, this is a good idea, or no, it's not. And take it whichever way you want, but I do want to go to your slide. It's slide 2, I think, Jay, because I also want to know in this slide why there is like a soil EKG, because that's what it looks like to me on the left hand side.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would love for you to
Sure.
explain this. But so to that question though, what goes into creating these prescription maps? Why should we trust them? Or what do we sort of have to take into consideration?
Yeah. So there's a lot there to digest. A lot of questions within that statement, I guess. And so maybe I'll start with backing up and speaking a little bit to how we came to do even VR seeding, and that might explain, some of those questions within that comment, and that was, our sense of there's a lack of very VR management of both seeding and fertility in our area because we don't have a lot of range of topography. We have very little elevation change over a mile. And when I say a very little, it could be as much as 1 foot over 1 mile is a field that we can do a pretty good job of surface draining on. And so because of that lack of physical variability that we see above the ground, there's not a lot done in our area. And so the mindset was, we know different areas of our field produces different yield. So why? Let's try to explain it. And so really what we tried to do is dig into, and we simplified it, 3 different zones on our field. How can we be more profitable in our most profitable, our average, and our least profitable? And so we developed 3 zones. And actually, if Producer Jay just clicks back 1 slide, there's a quick snapshot of on that image on the right for any listeners. It's basically a field map with about 16 fields. So we took a chunk of our fields that are all together, and we tried to determine profitability zones or productivity zones. And every field was different. Different fields, we've tried different strategies because we're trying to figure out which is which. But if we can jump back to the second slide and what Lindsay wants to jump into, uh, then we figured out, okay, here's our zones based off our last 15 years of cleaned up yield data. We know one is more profitable than the other. Then we put a soil moisture probe in each zone and tried to understand what the heck was going on below ground to produce that different result above ground. And in this case, that EKG line that Lindsay mentioned, that is simply the rooting depth and the water uptake and the percent of water at each zone in one zone. And then basically what it shows is how deep the roots got throughout the growing season, how much water it pulled out, and how much water was available. And it was one tool that we used to kind of flush out, why is zone 1 more productive than zone 3? Well, look at the rooting depth. If you can get roots 10 centimeters deeper every 10 days, how much more water is available to that crop? And then it's maybe going to flush it out. So then once we learn that data, then it's like, okay, well, how do we maximize the profitability? In this case, we can turn down our plant population in zone 1 and turn it up in zone 3. And so it's about understanding, I guess, the data to make those decisions on which variable rate you need to do.
Right. So, and Mark is asking, what do you mean by light, medium, heavy? That you're referring to. So you've split them into zones, and that would be the seeding rate, whether you're going to go lighter or heavier. And this is sort of the visual interpretation of the rooting depth that you get in these different zones, right? Yeah.
That's right. So zone 1
right. Yeah.
Was, we were targeting 22 to 24 live plants a square foot. Put that in perspective compared to a lot of Western Canadian farms, that's 10 to 20% lighter than you would typically seed. And zone 3, 10 to 20% heavier than they would typically seed.
Okay. So Jonathan, from your perspective, so this is one way to do it, and you probably would love to have fields as uniformly flat that Laird gets to farm. They're also giant, wide open, and no Walmarts in the way. Anyway, but from your perspective, when you're putting, these prescription mats together, specifically for seeding rates, what goes into them? Why do you feel confident that, once you put this together, this is going to make either that more money per acre or make the best use of the water there, manage some risk? What goes into the rate decision?
So I was monitoring the chat there, seeing kind of what questions might be coming along a little bit here. And the weather one kept coming up, like how do you kind of manage weather risk around that? And there's a number of different ways of kind of doing that. And I would say the big one is you kind of need to think about this like playing odds to some extent, but you also have parts of the field that when you factor in some weather related components into building your prescription, mainly water, I would say is probably the big one. You can maybe help alleviate some of those concerns around that. So I would say that that certain parts of the field, for example, let's take a depressional area that may or may not flood depending on whether or not you have tile in the field. Well, either the crop grows or it's dead in some of those cases. Right. So maybe you manage for seeding rate to manage some risk rather than yield in that case from a cost standpoint, if it's an untiled field. If it's a tiled field, it's still probably not going to be the best yielding part of the field if it's prone to flooding. But I would say that's probably kind of the lens that you need to look at is, okay, if it's a dry year, how does this part of the field behave? It's an average year, how does this part of the field behave? And what's the appropriate seeding rate? If we run into dry weather conditions, what's the yield penalty if the tap turns off like it did this year? And in some parts of the field, reality is it doesn't matter because you essentially have unlimited soil moisture unless you're in like a severe drought. So, and if that's the case, like how frequently does that occur? So I would say when you're looking at this as a management tool on your operation, you need to look at it as what's the probability of response of this happening. And the question that I don't see being asked, and I would say we could probably go to slide 2 on this a little bit, is like,
Mhm.
there's probably parts of the field that we can do flat rate on, and that's the appropriate rate relative. Flat rate has been working for many growers for a long time. It's not like you're not getting a crop off the field and you haven't continued to expand your operation. So there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge, I would say, somewhat when you go to variable rate seeding, though, is once you start adjusting rates, that yield increase that you're getting from those areas has to pay for the cost of doing whatever we're doing over the whole field, because you need to get capture data in fields, not parts of the field, and write prescriptions for whole fields. So I would say you kind of need to play some probabilities when it comes to return on investment. So let's say it costs, in that chart below, top line is cost, side line is whatever the price is of the commodity you're growing per bushel. So I think Laird told me earlier, canola is $25 a bushel. So if it costs, I'm waiting to see if he cracks a smile or not. But
one day
So,
that'll be a right
yeah.
statement.
I would like to sell you all of my canola right now. Anyway, carrying on.
But so let's say it costs $5 to generate that prescription that you're going to put in the rate controller. Well, you need 0.2 of a bushel increase on average over the whole field. So
Right.
like sometimes we got to frame what's the risk from doing this. I think for some growers, they're at the point now that have adopted this. They're like, there is real yield penalty for me not doing this and writing proper prescriptions. Like they want scripts and they want to get it on the field when we have it dialed in. So that's I would say the piece that you kind of need to think about maybe a little bit. So the whole purpose for doing variable rate, yes, there's some harvest management and some other pieces to it, but the big thing is there's economic benefit to drive this whole process. Yeah. Otherwise, there's no point to it. So,
so and I guess that is so. A few things there that I heard that I think are key here is that, as you said, you know, and as Laird points out in his profit mapping too, right, is that you need to make enough off the zones that you're making more money off of to pay for all of it over the field, or save at least enough, and that all has to actually pencil out. But again, there are no guarantees, so this becomes risk management as well. Laird, good question here from Jason Vogt, who you may know. You said, from Wheat Pete, how complex does it get? And then we'll go to Jason's question. So if you're looking, Laird, at 3, let's say, seeding rates in a field, so light, medium, heavy. Jonathan, are you doing 3, 5, 10? Do you split it into buckets like that, or how does it, or what does it depend?
So we have the opportunity to do up to 10 if we're using the SWOT zone. Sometimes we'll do some additional check blocks on top of that. So typically using almost all 10 when we're writing the prescription to try and smooth it out as we go through the field. But
and like in Laird, in your example, you know, a lighter rate might be in that 10 to 20% lighter. Heavy is 10 to 20% heavier. Jonathan, when you're looking at, let's say, 5 zones, what kind of swing might we be talking from a 1 to a 5, like as far as even percentage or whatever? Is it an even larger range of, you know, 0 to 50 to 100% difference? Like what would it be? Just put nothing in those parts that are just gonna drown out.
Drown out? It's not going to be 0. I'm trying to think of. I think this would be good to go to slide 3 for some of that.
Sure.
But so when it comes to corn, you're going to have a range in responsiveness as far as response curves go. So it really partially depends on the individual field that you're working with, but generally you could see probably a 6,000 to 8,000 seed swing, I would say, in a cornfield. is probably pretty typical. Soybeans, doing some math quick here off the top of my head, probably like 60,000 seeds kind of thing. Like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's enough to add margin, which just blows my mind. Like, when it comes to corn, in the past, sometimes I've had customers take a prescription written for a certain hybrid. They go and put the wrong hybrid in. The difference or they just end up putting a different hybrid in the planter because that field is ready and it happens to be in there. And this, I would say, was early days of Jonathan writing variable rate prescriptions, not understanding some of these differences maybe, and didn't see a whole lot of response in the prescription and was kind of scratching her head. Saw a bit of lodging in the field. And what I can say is that particular hybrid, that when talking to the seed rep, they say, like, do not plant this over 34,000 or 33,000.
Right.
It does not like 36 and 38,000. Like, it is.
We prove that.
Is that what you're saying? We've proved that. We did not cost the grower a lot of yield necessarily, but
right.
They ended up spending money on seed and a prescription that they maybe didn't see the benefit from that they could have. So what's reasonable for a rate adjustment, I guess, the first thing you need to do is overcome the noise in the machine. So sometimes I've seen prescriptions written for, maybe it varies by 1,000 seeds over the entire field. Well, there's that much noise in the corn planter. Like, congratulations. You adjusted the rate by the same amount that the noise is in the corn planter. And if you're not seeing any benefit to it, well, there's that much noise in the corn planter every day of the week from the guy flat rating. And if you run John Deere Operations Center, you can go in and check and see what your percentage of good rate is, see what the rate was, and it'll come up with some of these numbers for you. So generally speaking, if the planter or the drill can hold within 5% of the target rate on either, like, so 2.5 on one side, 2.5 on the other side, if you're not adjusting beyond that throughout the entire field, like, you're not exceeding what the noise that the equipment has just trying to hold the target rate. So I think this is important to talk about as an industry, because sometimes it kind of gets overlooked at. So the drill, I would say, is a little bit rate dependent in terms of that ability to kind of hang on to it, depending on the crop that you're working with. So I put a whole bunch of different rates there, knowing that we have some people growing winter canola, spring canola, probably a whole bunch of different crops that I've never stepped foot in on Laird's operation, soybeans, wheat, winter barley, whatever it is. And so it's just what we're trying to do. The first thing you need to do is overcome the equipment noise. The second thing you need to do is overcome the phenotype response that Laird was talking about earlier. So the plants do have ability to adjust to some seed mortality or the improper rate being applied. What we're trying to do with variable rate seeding is overcome what the plant can't compensate for. And I think that's the piece that we need to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Laird, your thoughts on that? Because of course, you would come across canola fields where some farmers would like to go incredibly light on seeding rates, and there's only so much we can make up for. So your thoughts on this?
Yeah, for sure. I think, to talk about equipment and the capabilities of an equipment is so important. One of the reasons why we did 3 zones is to simplify it, because, when you're running with a 60-foot drill, or, the average sprayer in Western Canada is 100 feet to 180 feet. And so when you send that up and down the field, doing different rates of whatever it is you're trying to do, there's not that many passes in the field. And so to get blocks, you do have to simplify it to some degree so that your equipment can dial in to be within that 5% going up and down the field. I think that's, one reason why we simplified it to 3 zones, to see those bigger ranges. When you do that, you run the risk of losing what you're trying to achieve, but it's simplified. That is number one. I'll maybe just touch on the canola. You can flat rate seed canola across the field, whether you're targeting 5 plants a square foot or 10 plants a square foot. And we naturally get variable rate emergence everywhere in the field. right from
First
the
time.
best to the worst seeding conditions, we end up with
Yeah.
1 and 2 plants a square foot, and we end up with 12 plants a square foot.
Right.
Why? Because it's canola. And so, as I use that as trials, essentially. How does that affect the maturity, the weed control, the disease pressure, the insect pressure, everything to follow? And more often than not, that natural variability we get is all we can work with. And it's also one of the reasons why not as many people do VR seeding, by productivity zone in canola, is because that margin of error isn't much once you start dropping below four plants a
That's
square
right.
foot kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jim shares, and I agree here too. This is one of the other complications for something like something that tillers, like our cereals, like our wheat
Yeah.
and winter wheat, especially. Jim says, I think wheat has a natural ability to create its own variable rate by setting more or less tillers if we give ourselves the opportunity to manage those tillers, so early versus late. And I mean, that is a lot of what goes into a winter wheat crop, certainly, is what does it look like going into winter, and what decisions do we make in the spring to manage for it. But that Laird sort of, to me, is sort of in line with what canola does if you do a flat rate. Sometimes our mortality, guys, it's terrible. In canola, like it's bad some years.
Well,
Yeah.
and other crops, it can be just as bad, but I would say we don't document it and we don't pay attention to
Mm,
it.
do you think so?
Uh,
Okay.
it's a real reality.
You heard it
Seed
here
it,
first,
seed it,
folks.
and come back. But actually, maybe just to touch on that little bit about wheats, it's
Yeah.
interesting. We've only been doing variable rate seeding on a handful of fields the last 2 years, and so not only do we, and I haven't shown these results because I didn't want to get too deep into the data. Not only did we have very different plant stands and mortality rates between the 2 different years, we had a difference of an average of 1.5 tillers versus 4 tillers per plant.
Wow.
And so I think Jim commented on wheat's ability to adapt and change. Is it
Yeah.
cool or hot during those conditions? Of May
Yeah.
15th to June 15th is usually when our tillers are getting affected. And so again, we're boiling it back, coming back to the weather, is how do you manage that variability, not knowing what weather conditions you're going to get,
Hmm.
but just writing down 8 out of 10 years, what am I going to get, and make a plan and move
And
forward
then,
from
yeah.
there.
Okay, we have one clip that I do want to play, Producer Jay. It's with Dale Cowan, because we've touched on a few things here tonight about verifying what we actually end up with. So whether that's mortality rates, whether that's final emergence, conditions at planting or seeding, and what we actually end up with, and then of course verifying what we put in the ground versus what we end up with. And so we do have a clip on that. And then I want to touch on some of these questions of sort of, verifying the decisions we make, the maps that we make, and if it was the right choice. So Producer Jay, if you would, we'll go to our clip and then our last read.
Well, I think, with any precision ag technology, you always do a plan first, or hopefully you do, and then you implement the plan, and then you follow through. And I think one of the areas I feel personally that we're missing in is when you do a lot of variable rate seeding or just straight rate seeding, is how many of us actually do a final population just prior to harvest? What are we actually harvesting compared to what we actually planted? And that number is not the same number. And quite often, it's quite variable through the field, and it's quite hard sometimes walking through a field to actually see that. So we decide to use some drone technology and see if we can't get a more detailed count of just the distribution of population. Never mind variable rate seeding, just what is the distribution in a normal fixed rate seeding application.
Now we have some images here, and I'm going to put them up on the screen, detailing harvest populations in a field that you followed. They really tell an interesting story. What are we seeing here? This first one that really looks at counts across the field.
Well, this is a result of a drone image. So this is a 79-acre field, and normally when you walk a field, you might do a dozen population counts, maybe never get to the back of the farm. So this drone was programmed to fly the entire field and basically take an image on every acre, the center of every acre. And in doing so, we were able to capture at a high resolution, only 50 feet above ground level, so very detailed imagery, and then we subscribe to a service to interpret that image using a logarithm to count tassels. So what you're looking at there is the final result of a map, and those circles are where the image was taken, and that number in the circle is the plant stands in thousandths of an acre, or the tassel counts rather in thousandths of an acre. So it gives you a pretty good distribution across the whole field of just what the variability was in final population.
The Agronomist is made possible through the Farm Learning Hub, MMP, and the Edible Bean School. From planting and seeding to fertility and nutrient management decisions to harvest and storage, Real Ag's Edible Bean School is a video series that tackles every facet of the edible bean growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Edible Bean School is made possible through sponsorship by Hensel Co-op. Find the videos on our YouTube channel. So what I would love from that map, and I have to go back and watch the end of that video, is I would love to see the comparison to what they had wanted as final tassel counts for those areas, because that, of course, to me, like, that's half of it is, okay, this is a cool way to potentially evaluate what you ended up with. But what was the goal, I guess, is the next question. So, Jonathan, I'll go to you first on sort of that question of when you make these maps, the growers that you're working with. I mean, as you've alluded to, for those who are using them, they're committed to them. They're seeing the results. They're seeing the value. But how do you go through that process of sort of evaluating, did we get it right from an operations standpoint, but also in the turnout of was it the right call?
So operationally, we go and check after the script has been applied, partly to see equipment performance. So the first couple of years that I was working with my first few customers, they're still running vacuum planters, and setup maybe wasn't perfect. So the rate that we were trying to apply wasn't perfect. Figured some of that out. Next issue was setting up look ahead properly on the rate controllers. Have figured some of that out. So there's been some growing pains as we go through this. We get through them a lot faster now that we have some experience. How do we evaluate the prescriptions itself as far as rate goes? So like Laird, for example, is doing field checks to check mortality. We're doing along the same lines by management zone when possible to validate what we're trying to accomplish as far as seeding rates go. And then we also run check blocks in almost every seeding script that we write. If the customer gives us the yield data back, we run that and validate kind of like a response curve over multiple rates by zone to kind of see what direction should we be going in. So I kind of view seeding rates a bit like steering an ocean liner, not a speedboat where we're jetting in and out. And it's a question of, should this area get more than we have been doing or less? And looking at it that way, then a few people are asking, well, are you seeding this corn hybrid from Pioneer at 35,550 in these parts of the field? Like, it's a great question, but you're not really looking at the bigger picture. So.
Mm-hmm. And we do have a couple slides. That is actually one of the other things I want to talk about, is that differences between varieties or hybrids within a crop type, because of course there's differences between crop types, but there's going to be significant differences within them. And there's been some good questions about, how do you find some of that out? So I do want to touch on that. But Laird, I want to give you a chance to answer on this one as well. I know you've also got some profit maps that you shared with us, but when you're looking at, for your farm, you're choosing sort of these 3 zones basically. How do you evaluate, if you've got it right, if you did, the best job you could have? How do you validate?
Yeah, so at Patura, I'll give you a little bit of backstory. So the third generation that is transitioning out of the farm, Calvin Patura, we have what was called in every field a CALS check. Why? Because that's what he's done for 45 plus years. And that's really the only way to understand, are we making the right decision? With these CAL checks, the standard rate based on whatever crop it is or whatever you're trying to achieve. And so when you put these checks through the field, and I think actually on the fifth slide in that deck that I sent, where initially I just talked about the poor or the high rates of mortality in the seed. There's a good example. You can see the cows
Yeah.
check, and
Down
and
at
we
the
call
bottom
that
there. Yeah.
base zero. We're just trying to understand,
Okay.
are we gaining from what we used to do, or are we not? And over the years, as we've done it and dug more into it, we realized, oh, look at that. We're getting lower rates of mortality in our most productive regions of our field, and we're getting the highest rates of mortality in our least productive areas of the field. Then it starts to validate, well, there's clearly something different there. What is it? Is it organic matter? Is it soil structure? Is it stubble residue? Is it, the list goes on and on and on as to what might be causing that difference. And again, then it helps to explain, okay, well, we're seeing there is differences despite not having a difference in elevation or topography or slope and so on or so forth. So that's how we check it, and that's how we validate it. I can see how you get lost in the data once you start varying a whole bunch of factors. You have to keep some things consistent to understand if you're making the right choice or not, then learn from it, and then start to implement it across the farm. You got to start small. We did one field in 1 year. We did 3 fields this year. The question is, how many fields do we do next year now?
Right, exactly. Jay, can you go to the next slide? I think this is a profit map. So
Yeah.
yes, so this obviously is a key part of what you're trying to figure out from that perspective. So walk me through this. What does this tell you, not tell you, those sorts of things?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. It's this is a messy version of version 1 out of the first year, but we're making all these decisions and we're making all these changes, and we're doing it based on information we've learned on the past, the data. But what does it mean at the end of the day? And you put a map up like this. This is a field where we had our cows check rates kind of in the center, a little bit to the left. You can see a couple red dots.
Yep.
And then you can see, our drains in the field where yield was
Yep.
significantly less. And then you can see these big green areas on the outside of the field. And in this case, on this field, we had 20 acres of this field on the outside and the bottom that we didn't put fall fertility to. And we just did a light rate in the spring because we knew it was a saline area. And what do you know? The most profitable areas of the field is actually the areas we didn't put down our normal rates of nitrogen. And so it just goes to show, when you start moving a whole bunch of factors, what is it that matters at the end of the day, and where is that profit coming from? And if we can layer all this data together, and you can get that visual of what areas of your field are most profitable, it really starts to change the way you think about your management practices rather than a flat rate.
Now, there's so many things to unpack on that one. Also, look, everybody, this is what it looks like in Manitoba when you do surface drainage. Anyway, wouldn't tile be nice, Laird? Anyway, okay. You don't have enough slope for it. Maybe you do. Some areas do. Okay. There's the question, though, of every year making, how do you make decisions for the coming year? And so, certainly for 24, for 25, Laird, you guys have been through the ringer a little bit. And then Jonathan, here in Ontario, the tap turned off in early July, and it didn't turn back on for quite some time. So that is, of course, the biggest question always, is what kind of season we're going to get. But what learnings, Laird, did you take from these, from 24 to 25 was so different? What do you carry forward to 26?
That is a good question, and we're not through the winter debate meetings yet
Yes,
to
that's
really
true.
pull all the lessons out. The lesson I think I learned is keep trying new things, and we'll learn new things. We got, I guess, a little slap of reality handed to us this spring with our wheat seeding rates in particular, and had 40 to 50% mortality rates, doing everything right. And so that's one of the biggest lessons I took out of this year. And I have to consider moving forward to next year. But but keep capturing the data and keep digesting it. We do a good job at making data. We do a poor job in general of analyzing it and making corrective actions or decisions out of it. And that's the stage I'm at right now for next year,
Yeah,
to answer that
that's
question.
okay.
Yeah.
That is an excellent assessment of what most of us deal with. Okay, Jay, let's go to Jonathan's. I think it's slide 5 because I know we're running out of time, but I think it's a really important point to talk about the differences within a crop type versus between them. And then there is, of course, always the question of how do we find this out? So, Jonathan, walk me through this slide, and then we can have that conversation about, is this information that we can easily find? We can talk about it at corn as well, but let's walk me through this first, and then we'll go there.
So this is research that it's actually from small plot research, so it's replicated, and working with a local seed company, we'll say, that is anonymous, which is why I didn't put the wheat varieties on. So wheat 1, 2, 3, 4 are different wheat varieties that are grown in Ontario. And we're just trying to figure out, based on seeding rate, how do the yield components change? And there's a variety of reasons why I'm running this. One is, does the disease spectrum change? When does it lodge? Which ones are more stable when it comes to maintaining 1,000 kernel weight? Because if you can increase seeding rate in some of the best parts of the field and maintain 1,000 kernel weight and not have it lodge, you're going to add yield. So that's just how the math works. So this is from this past year, and we're running this trial again. We switched out a couple of the varieties. Probably the one that, looking at the data real quick, is wheat 2. So it's kind of in the middle of the graph. So you increase seeding rate, especially to 2 million seeds, it starts to drop off quite quickly on 1,000 kernel weight. So maybe the yield's still relatively the same, but for whatever reason, plant stress wise, it does not like higher seeding rates. So typically in the past, when I've ran these types of trials, we go and count plants, number of tillers, heads, kind of thing. Unfortunately, time wise, we weren't able to collect that data this year. Try and in our earnest to collect it next year, but just to try and understand, do some varieties behave differently in terms of how they make these yield components when we're trying to adjust seeding rates. So that's kind of what came out of this. The one thing I was struggling with a little bit, now we had a very open fall last year, so I'm not sure why a couple of them for the quote unquote optimal seeding rate of 1.6 million are maybe a little bit lighter at those. The only thing I can come up with is we did have significant rust in the plots and there was no fungicide applied. So, and significant amount of powdery mildew in a few of them. So it, wonder if maybe the top end in some of those areas got cut off, and by increasing your seeding rate, that maybe overcame it. So,
okay.
If you go
now,
to,
I was going to say, let's go forward, right, to the next slide, Jay, but it might be 2 more. Let's go to the next one just for a sec, I think. Yeah. Okay. So, Jonathan, you're going to have to talk to me like I'm 5, because I've been trying, I don't know, I think I've watched like 16 corn schools on the whole fixed versus flex debate, etc. And this slide is not helping me. So when we're talking about VR, so variable rate of so we're varying our plant populations in corn, why does it matter if it's a fixed versus flex hybrid?
So fixed year is like keeping the size of your paycheck the same size regardless of paychecks. Flex, you get the same amount, but it doesn't matter how many paychecks you get. Probably be, maybe to put it in common people terms. So flex it doesn't really respond as much to population. It has if anything, the size of your paychecks gets smaller the more you put out there. So your real ag people told you you're getting $50,000 with flex. Do you want it 50 times one time or 10 times? It doesn't matter. You're getting $50,000.
Okay. Yeah.
Fixed, forget that. We're paying you $1,000 a paycheck. How many paychecks do you want?
Okay. So how then, like, how important is it if I'm ordering seed and I want to do variable rate? How important is it to have that conversation with my seed rep then on what I'm choosing when it
So
comes to corn?
I think when it comes to making some of those decisions, I don't necessarily need to be involved in the conversation.
Right.
There's enough stuff for the reps themselves to stay on top of it. What I'm looking for when they come to me specifically for corn is, what did you all order and where are you going to put it? And then I'll figure out how to optimize that at that point.
Okay.
Is there ways of maybe optimizing it earlier in the order process at times? Yes, there probably is, and certainly do help sometimes with that. I find myself maybe stretched a little bit thin to stay on top of it relative to people that do this every day. And at some point, if you're giving someone a check for 10,000, 50,000, 250,000, or whatever the number is for corn seed, you probably need to trust their judgment to some extent, or why are you doing business with them?
Always
So,
trust your seed salesman.
yeah,
Always.
like
Yeah. Laird would like
Laird's
you to know that you should trust your seed guy.
exactly. So I guess there's a few comments in the chat about, well, where do I get data on this to make these
Yes.
decisions?
Yeah.
And the
Exactly.
reality
Yeah.
is we need to make decisions on imperfect data. And especially if you've never seen it before, usually the seed rep has seen it 2 or 3 years before it's came to market. At least one or two, they can kind of give you an indication on where to start. And then if you start there and then kind of go from there. So these charts are off the Pioneer website. I picked them because they're a good visualization in terms of response curves. Other companies have something similar, maybe not quite as slanty with nice curves. So the one on the left, the more it goes up for yield relative to so how steep it is, very steep, fixed year, because every plant you add, bushels go up. The one on the right, you add more seed, it doesn't go up as fast. So it's a little bit of a flatter response curve. And when we're working in the systems that we're in, I don't need necessarily perfect data to make a decision, because we're just trying to do better than flat rate and be less wrong, which is kind of in my last slide or near the end there. Third last slide, I guess.
Third last,
we just want to be less wrong.
ahead.
We're not trying to be 100% right. So
that's right.
The people
less
asking
wrong.
Less wrong. We don't need to be perfect to do this. And until you start playing around with this, you don't really know what to do. And when I first signed the dotted line to have the job title agronomist, I thought I would have agronomy figured out probably in 2 to 3 years. Okay. No, I'm still learning. Okay?
This is, Jonathan, 100%. I think it is the mark of a curious mind and a humble soul. And I'm pretty sure every year I realize there's more I don't know. And that's probably a good thing, because it keeps it interesting, although sometimes very frustrating. So yes, I am always personally amazed how many things I learn that I don't know and how much more there is to learn. But that keeps it interesting. I love this. Let's be less wrong, not 100% right. Okay, Laird, on the topic of differences within a crop type versus differences between crops, I mean, you're growing the seed, you're managing these acres. How valuable, what are the valuable lessons that you can learn that you can, of course, pass on to people who are considering different varieties, etc., now that you are beginning to use variable rate in your own fields?
Well, I think this is really the second net benefit that is really coming out of it for us here on our farm, is just that more in-depth understanding of how a variety behaves given a certain set of conditions. We can't control the conditions, but we can explain to you how it's going to perform when the conditions go this direction or this direction. And that's a powerful tool in understand the variety and the placement and ultimately setting customers up for success. And so That's why we're striving to understand each variety even more and more and more. One of the challenges is a lot of the varieties, they're out for a short amount of time. And by the time we wrap our head around that variety and how it behaves, sometimes there's another variety out that is a little bit better in terms of a certain characteristic here and there. And so, yeah, it's been huge for us. I look at wheat, I look at soybeans, I look at canola. Those are the three that we have some very distinct variety differences. Outside of corn, we've talked about that already, that the right variety in different seeding rates really needs to be talked about, whether you're doing variable rate or whether you're just doing flat rate. High, low, is that plant going to mesh together? Is it going to tiller? How thick is the leaf? What's your crop canopy? How much nitrogen is there? Like all these things, the more data we collect just doing VR on one variety, all that happens is the more questions we have, because we don't know what the law of diminishing returns is for each variety unless you test it out year after year after year. And so as you can tell, it just creates more questions and more debates and more trials.
And that is the mark of a good show, is that we have more questions than answers. So there you go.
Well, you're never going to run out of episodes.
I'm never. We're
Agronomists,
going to.
ever.
Yeah. This is, I think, episode like 217, 219. We have hundreds to go, everybody. Absolutely. And we focused on seeding rates. We haven't even talked about throwing fungicide into the mix, because of course there's a huge varietal difference when you start to look at how they respond to different management, including fungicides, nitrogen, etc. So everybody, this is why you still have jobs. Agronomists, tip of the hat to each of you to learn these things. Okay, we are out of time, but yes, there are so many more questions we could ask. I appreciate you both very much sharing your time, your expertise, your maps. I love the CALS check, Laird. I really appreciate that. Lucky you guys for having that. I think that's pretty cool to be able to go back and take a look. And it gives you a mark in the sand, at least. Pretty cool. So thank you both. This has been a lot of fun. Everyone, of course, come back next week. We're going to be talking about crop sequence, not just rotation. No. Sequence of the crop, and does it make a difference? Speaking of questions we don't have answers for. So that'll be 8 p.m. Eastern, of course, here. And everybody head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. Make sure you get those CU credits. Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, and thanks everyone in the chat. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Cheers, everybody.